Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here today. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here and to congratulate all of you for creating this institution and an alternative rallying point for people within the Academy who don't necessarily share all of the prevailing wisdom. Doesn't mean, I'm sure, that there's any uniform view in this organization. I think that should be a strength of academia. But having myself been to a university and a law school where there was all kinds of diversity except intellectual diversity, I know what all of you probably go through in your own respective positions on a daily basis. So I'm very glad to see ASMEA up and running, and glad to see you here in Washington for this meeting, and I wish everybody the best of luck into the future. I wanted to just talk this morning about some of the issues facing the Middle East in particular. I don't really purport to be much of an expert on Africa. What I know about Africa is largely about failed UN peacekeeping operations. And we can maybe talk about that another time, but to focus on the Middle East, there's no doubt that we're in a very critical period, and we have before us a time that will be, I think, an acid test of the Obama administration's theories about how to conduct diplomacy, about the nature of American foreign policy, and how all this is going to unfold. And I think it's important to start with an appreciation that President Obama is a very different kind of American president, different from his predecessors, Democrat and Republican alike, in the very dramatically different view he has of his position, his role as president, and his view of America in the world. I've called President Obama the first post-American president, and by that I chose that very carefully. I don't mean un-American. I don't mean anti-American. I mean post-American, that because he's sort of beyond all that, patriotism stuff. He sees himself in many respects the way large numbers of political leaders in Europe see themselves. They're beyond being French or German or Italian. They're European, or even beyond that, they're global citizens. And the president has said that's pretty much the way he sees himself. And I think that affects his view of his role as president and his view of the role of the United States in international affairs, and particularly in difficult areas like the Middle East. He does not, in my view, believe in the notion of American exceptionalism, which is a concept that's hard to define. A lot of people have different views about it, but which basically rests on the proposition that America is a different kind of country than other countries in the world. It's not a combination of ethnicity and territory. It's a country founded on an idea about individual freedom, and it's one that's attracted people from all over the world who share that idea. And it's got a number of different names associated with it. Some of our founders called it the New Jerusalem or the City on the Hill. And I don't really want to have a long diversion on what it means to believe in American exceptionalism, except to say I don't think the president does. And he was asked this question on his last European trip by a reporter for the Financial Times, and he said, yes, I believe in American exceptionalism, which is certainly a way to have on the record a rebuttal to the point I just made. But that was only the first part of his sentence. In the rest of his sentence, he said, yes, I believe in American exceptionalism the same way the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the same way the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. So, there are 192 members of the United Nations, and I'm sure if he had gone on a little bit longer, he would have said, as the Ecuadorians believe in Ecuadorian exceptionalism, and the Zimbabweans believe in Zimbabwean exceptionalism, and on and on and on. Obviously, if everybody is exceptional, nobody is exceptional. And it's really a mark of the president's ability at wordsmithing that he was able to say in a single sentence two completely contradictory thoughts. And it's an indication of the credulity of the international press that they only picked up the first part of that. But it is important that we understand this difference. It's not the first time we've had a major political figure in this country who didn't believe in American exceptionalism. I don't think John Kerry in 2004 was far from that mark when he said American foreign policy had to satisfy what he called a global test of legitimacy. And it wasn't that different than the view that Michael Dukakis, the 1988 Democratic candidate, had back then. Vice President George H.W. Bush said about Dukakis, said, "My opponent sees the United States as just another well-mannered nation out there on the floor of the UN General Assembly somewhere between Albania and Zimbabwe." And I think that's a pretty good description of the Obama philosophy as well. So that's why when you bring this attitude about the presidency and about America's role in the world to challenges such as those we face in the Middle East, this is a president who comes at the whole subject of national security and foreign policy different than his predecessors, and certainly radically different than President Bush. But I would argue, in fact, although in substance their policies are not that much different, attitudinally very, very radically different from President Clinton as well. And I think facing the most difficult issues of Israel and its relationship with its neighbors and the continuing threat posed by Iran's support for international terrorism and its effort to acquire deliverable nuclear weapons, you can see the Obama administration playing out in ways that are quite consistent with this worldview that I think the president has. And I think playing out in ways that just 9 months into his administration should be very troubling to those who are concerned about American national security and concerned about the security of our friends and allies in the region. Let me just touch on a couple of these issues. In the Middle East itself, looking at the relation of Israel and its neighbors, I think the president essentially accepts the predominant European analysis that if you could only bring peace between Israel and the Arabs, or at least if you could make substantial progress on that front, sweetness and light would break out in the rest of the region, support for international terrorism would decline, the problem of Iran's nuclear weapons program would be solvable, and generally things would be a lot better. I think this is very nearly the exact opposite of the reality. But in any event, even if you buy that line of analysis, this has been, it was before January the 20th, it remains so today, a singularly inappropriate time to try and have negotiations to make substantive progress on these issues. Because on the Palestinian side, there simply are no legitimate interlocutors who can make commitments and carry them out in the years ahead. The choice at the moment is between a terrorist group, Hamas, and a supposedly former terrorist group, Fatah, both of which are wildly unpopular. So there's no legitimate, in my view anyway, no legitimate Palestinian spokesman, and no one that you can count on to make hard decisions and follow through on commitments. But that hasn't affected the president. He set a very senior American political figure, George Mitchell, very accomplished in his own political career, out into the wilderness, so to speak, and 9 months later, the Secretary of State, who I guess has a role in this issue, is reporting to the president that we have not entirely failed. And that was yesterday's good news, and I guess I agree with that. They have not entirely failed. There's still room to go. But events don't abide the administration's timetable, and we just had, I think, a very graphic demonstration last Friday at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, how the administration's own efforts can be overwhelmed by other circumstances. As I'm sure everybody here knows, the Human Rights Council overwhelmingly endorsed the Goldstone report. that it had authorized in January, the report on Israel's Operation Cast Lead in the Gaza Strip. The Goldstone report itself, which I have to confess I have not yet read all of because it's 600 pages long, but I've read big chunks of it. I find that to be a remarkable document. I found the resolution of the Human Rights Council to be an even more remarkable document, since it only talks about the part of the Goldstone report that deals with Israel's alleged crimes. And the fact that we saw only 6 out of 47 countries on the Human Rights Council, one of which, of course, was the United States, willing to vote against this report, tells you everything you need to know about the Human Rights Council and why it's no different than its predecessor, and why I think we were justified in the Bush administration back in 2006 in voting against the resolution that created the Human Rights Council, because we said at the time it's not going to be any better than and probably will be worse than its predecessor, all of which has proven to be true. But I think over the long stretch, what's really significant about the Goldstone report is not the specific incidents of alleged Israeli or Hamas violations of the laws of war. It's the basic thrust of the Goldstone report itself, which has enormous implications not just for Israel but for the United States, because the report essentially characterizes all of Operation Cast Lead as an action of collective punishment, a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and therefore delegitimizing everything about Israel's response, turning it from a legitimate exercise of the right of self-defense into collective punishment, meaning it's directed against the Palestinian inhabitants of Gaza as a whole, not against Hamas, even though the very nature of Hamas's terrorist activities depend on hiding themselves in amongst the civilian population. And in effect, if you read that Hamas strategy together with the Goldstone report, there is no legitimate military response against terrorist activities where the terrorists can fully embed themselves in a civilian population. I think had you had this report on the table prior to the U.S.-led NATO overthrow of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, people would have argued that our overthrow of Taliban was an act of collective punishment, and that the attack on the Taliban and al-Qaeda inside Afghanistan was illegitimate for the same reason that the Goldstone report finds Operation Cast Lead illegitimate. This really is the kind of continuing assault on the right of self-defense that we've seen in many instances in the past, including the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Again, an incident where Israel responded in self-defense and received nothing but international criticism right up to and through the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1701. This, in both cases, in both the Hezbollah war and Operation Cast Lead, one of the key arguments, and it's found in the Goldstone report, is that Israel was using disproportionate force, that conceding that there's sort of a right to self-defense, the argument was that Israel's military activities were well in excess of anything that's legitimate. Now, this is a further diminution of the right of self-defense in a very significant way, because it basically says that you are not entitled to do more than respond in somehow a proportionate response to any given attack. Whereas, in fact, the right of self-defense, if it means anything, must mean the right to eliminate the threat itself, so that you don't simply have to push the aggressor back to where he was the day before the aggression. You're entitled to eliminate the aggressor. And I tried in my own way back in 2006 when we were trying to buy time for Israel in the Security Council. I said, look, this argument about disproportionate force is the equivalent of saying to the United States after the attack on Pearl Harbor, you're entitled to self-defense, but only up to the point where you sink an equivalent number of Japanese aircraft carriers and battleships, and impose an equal number of casualties. Whereas, in fact, our right of self-defense in World War II meant that we could eliminate the threat of Japan and the threat of its allies, which we did, and which we were entitled to do along with our allies. Once you cut off the ability to respond and defeat the threat itself, you've made the right of self-defense extraordinarily narrow. That has dramatic implications for Israel. It has dramatic implications for the United States, and not just in these more or less conventional conflicts on the ground, but for some of the larger questions that I think we're very close to facing when it comes to Iran's nuclear weapons program. I think we've seen Iran over the course of 20 years of clandestine effort to acquire deliverable nuclear weapons, and especially over the last 7 years, they have very effectively used international negotiations as a cover to make the advances that they need to have, both in their nuclear and ballistic missile programs, to have a capability to deliver nuclear weapons anywhere in the world. And it's a demonstration of a very significant point that in the proliferation arena, time almost always is on the side of the would-be proliferator. I think the Iranians have understood that. I think the North Koreans understand it in their neck of the woods. And I think that the United States, both in the Bush administration and in the Obama administration, continues not to understand that point. We have in the past month the most recent demonstration of that with this idea that Iran will ship some of its low-enriched uranium to Russia for further enrichment, bring it back, and use it in a medical research reactor. As I came here, I was looking for the Iranian response. I don't think we have it definitively, but the early indications are that they don't seem to have accepted this proposal. I'm amazed because it's a very good proposal from Iran's point of view. I think the most likely outcome by the time the day ends, we'll see that they've neither accepted nor rejected it. They're doing exactly what they've done for the past 7 years. They want to talk about it further. And what will the Obama administration do? They'll talk about it further. Every day during which the Iranian centrifuges will be spinning, there will be more low-enriched uranium, and other aspects of their program will continue. So I think that we're down to a very narrow and, I must say, very unattractive range of options. I think one option, which may be the de facto outcome, is that Iran is going to get nuclear weapons. I mean, I think if I were to predict today, I'd say that's the most likely outcome. They won't get them tomorrow, but they're going to get them in the very near future. There are those in the administration, those outside, General Abizaid, a former CENTCOM commander among them, who say that's really not so bad. We can contain and deter Iran the same way we contained and deterred the Soviet Union. Frankly, I don't know why anybody of sound mind wants to go back to a time when we're at risk of nuclear annihilation. I don't recall that as being a particularly enjoyable environment to live in. And if anything, the regime in Tehran is a less appetizing possessor of nuclear weapons than the Soviet Union. Say whatever else you want about the communists. Their views of materialism were such they only thought they went around once in life. They weren't about to throw it away too casually. That I don't think is necessarily the view in Tehran. And I don't think that the uneasy bipolar standoff of the Cold War is something that we want to replicate with a country like Iran. And it's no consolation that Iran's capability isn't as great as the Soviet Union's was. The fact that they can only incinerate a few American cities doesn't make me feel a lot better. And it wouldn't make the people in those cities that were incinerated feel much better either after it was over. So I think it just underlines the importance of not letting Iran get the weapons in the first place. Even if I'm wrong on the deterrence point, there's a more fundamental analytical failure on the part of those who say it's okay if Iran gets nuclear weapons, and that is it won't stop there. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia will, Egypt will, Turkey will, perhaps others, so that you could see a Middle East in 5 or 10 years with half a dozen or more countries each possessing admittedly relatively small arsenals of nuclear weapons, but each eyeing the other saying, I wonder if I should strike first today before he strikes me. So if you didn't like the bipolar standoff of the Cold War, imagine the complexities of the three-dimensional chess of a multipolar nuclear Middle East, and you can see that's not an environment that anybody should want there either. I think diplomacy has essentially failed. I think, back in the 90s we used to talk about exit strategies from UN peacekeeping operations. Have you ever heard a diplomat talk about an exit strategy from failed negotiations? It's one of those things that doesn't exist at the State Department. There's never a failed negotiation. This one's gone on for 7 years with the Europeans. Seven lean years, I don't know what it is, 7 lean years or whatever. It's going to go on forever unless somebody appreciates that this simply works to Iran's advantages for the reasons I mentioned before. Similarly, I don't think sanctions are going to work because unfortunately the possibility of sanctions, really strict sanctions, which might have worked 5 or 6 years ago, have been dissipated, so I don't see that as a possible route. And I don't think that we have in Iran in the near term the prospect of real regime change. I think had the Bush administration done more in its 8 years to support Iranian opposition groups, we might have been in a position in the turmoil after the fraudulent June 12 presidential election to have supported the Iranian people who went out into the streets, obviously extremely upset by that election and upset for a variety of reasons, economically, ethnically, and otherwise, with the regime in Tehran, but we missed that opportunity, and I'm not sure it's going to come again in the near future. That's why I think, other than the option of Iran with nuclear weapons, we now face a very hard decision that Israel is going to have to make, whether it will strike preemptively against Iran's nuclear facilities. I once had the thought that the Bush administration would use U.S. military force before it left office. That obviously didn't happen. I think there is zero chance the Obama administration will do that. So for well or ill, when you play all these cards out, you're down now to a question of what Israel will do. Israel has not hesitated to strike preemptively in the past, destroying the Osirak reactor outside Baghdad in 1981, destroying the North Korean nuclear reactor in Syria in September of 2007. So they're not hung up by concerns about the international legality of the preemptive use of military force. They've got that pretty well under control. And that, by the way, is something that has enormous implications for the United States that I don't think the Obama administration is attuned to. So my guess is we're within a fairly narrow window. I don't think there's any one line, one red line beyond which, one date beyond which it becomes impossible. But I think Iran's continuing activity to disperse and harden its nuclear program, of which this facility at Qum revealed publicly back in September, which the IAEA will visit tomorrow, is just one likely example. I think that is actually a demonstration that if they were again performing illicitly at Qum, there are other facilities that we don't know about either. That combined with the potential deployment of the Russian S-300 air defense system, which has been bought and paid for by Iran but not yet delivered, are timelines that continue to press on Israel and make the military option a declining option over time. I don't know what Israel is going to do. I frankly don't think whether Iran accepts this deal on the Russian further enrichment of its uranium should affect that decision one way or the other. I think it's very clearly the goal of Mohammed al-Baradi, the Director General of the IAEA, to constrain Israel's options. His term expires at the end of November. Thank God it won't come a day too soon. But I think that's really what is causing the pressure here for these negotiations on this deal. I think Israel is going to have to make a very hard decision, and the consequences of that decision are going to be felt in the Middle East for a long time to come, whether it decides to strike or doesn't decide to strike. So I think from the perspective of contemporary observers and for those who look at the Middle East and the broader region as the subject of their academic interest, this is going to be an extremely challenging period, and one that's going to require great statesmanship, certainly on the part of the United States, but on the part of a lot of others in the region as well, including the Arab states of the Persian Gulf region and the broader Middle East, who, at least in my experience, don't want an Iran with nuclear weapons any more than Israel does, and that recognize that while there's nothing they can do to prevent Iran from getting it, are not necessarily going to be unhappy if and when Israel strikes. What they say publicly, I think, may well be very different from what they feel privately, and indeed, as recently as September, at least one minister of a Gulf Arab state said, "Why do you think the Israelis haven't attacked yet?" Which I think shows the view of many of them there. So you'll have a lot of work cut out for you over the next year. I think whatever course Israel takes or whatever other developments there are because of the nature of this region. But I think you all understood that probably when you got into the subject matter. So I appreciate your invitation here today. I wish you all good luck, and I'd be happy to try and answer any questions that you have.